There is a version of New York City that no longer exists. Not the glass-fronted metropolis of today, not even the version preserved in old photographs, but something rawer, louder, and far more dangerous than most people can picture. A city that reeked of sulfur and sweat and ambition in roughly equal measure. If you could fold time in half and find yourself standing on the cobblestones of Manhattan in the year 1880, the first thing to hit you would not be any particular sight. It would be the sound, a relentless, almost physical wall of noise. Iron wheels cracking against stone, bells clanging without pause, men screaming over one another just to be heard. This was not a city that had found a comfortable rhythm. This was a city in violent and continuous labor, hemorrhaging growth from every street corner, tearing itself apart and putting itself back together at a pace that defied comprehension. And right at the center of that chaos lived the wealthiest men on the planet, in marble palaces separated by just a handful of blocks from families who had never once slept in a heated room. The distance between those two worlds was not measured in geography. It was measured in the width of a single street. We begin at the very southern tip of Manhattan, at the waterline, where the harbor opens into something almost theatrical in its congestion. Ships crowd the water from every direction. Steamships with thick black funnels alongside tall wooden schooners with elegant rigging, all fighting for any available inch of dock space. The air carries the unmistakable taste of the Atlantic, salt, cold iron, and the sharp, sour tang of tens of thousands of unwashed bodies moving through this stretch of waterfront every single week. That is what this place is, a funnel, a bottleneck, through which an entire continent's future is being pressed, one desperate and hopeful family at a time. Along the waterfront stands a circular stone building, and it is destined to become famous for an entirely different reason than the one it serves today. This is Castle Garden. Before Ellis Island ever entered anyone's vocabulary, this was where immigrants first stepped onto American ground. Families from Ireland, Germany, and Italy made their way through these doors, clutching everything they owned in battered wooden trunks, staring up at the skyline with expressions caught somewhere between genuine terror and raw, aching hope. The building carried a peculiar history even at this point. It had once been a concert hall, the very venue where Jenny Lind, the celebrated Swedish nightingale, performed for packed audiences of New York's wealthiest residents. By 1880, it had been converted into something far less glamorous. A processing center for the displaced and the hopeful. Within a generation it would transform once more, becoming an aquarium, while the arriving stream of immigrants was redirected to that small island barely visible in the far distance. Castle Garden would quietly settle into life as a monument to an era. Turn your back on the water and the city swallows you whole. Broadway stretches northward like a gash through the body of the island, and stepping onto it transforms the experience entirely. The open sky disappears overhead. Buildings press in from both sides, tall enough to swallow the daylight. The ground beneath your feet is not what you would expect. Not smooth pavement, not a single painted marking. Rough-hewn stone blocks, irregular and uneven, laid without ceremony. The surface perpetually coated in mud and the accumulated grime of thousands of horses working these streets every day. Rising above everything, cutting clean into the sky at the intersection ahead, stands the spire of Trinity Church. In 1880, this is the tallest structure in all of New York City. The idea that steel-framed towers would soon dwarf it is still nothing more than speculation in architects' notebooks. For now, Trinity Church claims the skyline entirely. The only thing reaching upward in a city otherwise consumed by the drive to spread outward, devouring territory with every month that passes. This stretch of Broadway belongs to the oldest money in New York. The Knickerbockers, Dutch-descended families whose fortunes were built on land and trade long before the current age of industrial ambition, watch from brownstone townhouses as the orderly world they inherited is being dismantled by commerce. They have almost no power to halt the process. The wealth flowing through this corridor is too immense, too fast, too voracious to be contained by tradition or social convention. Push deeper into the crowd, past men in silk top hats who carry themselves with the absolute confidence of those who have never questioned their position in the world, past messengers sprinting between carriages, clutching telegrams that could represent fortunes. Overhead, telegraph wires stretch between buildings in such a dense tangle that in places they genuinely block out the sky. Each wire carries information, stock prices, shipping news, deals being struck and destroyed in the span of minutes. The wires are the fully exposed nervous system of this city, And that exposure will be proven catastrophic in just 8 years, when the Great Blizzard of 1888 buries half of New York. At the corner of Wall Street, men in dark coats argue with theatrical intensity over the price of Western Railroad shares and the sudden collapse of ventures none of them had fully grasped. Wealth is being generated here from nothing physical whatsoever. No one in this vicinity is mining ore or constructing buildings. The money simply appears, conjured from information and nerve, and an appetite for risk. But step into any side alley from this intersection, and you will find something else entirely. Sandwich men wearing wooden boards, advertising full meals for a single nickel. The gulf between these two realities is structural. We move north, and the heavy dock smell slowly recedes, replaced by roasting coffee and the dry bite of construction. The city here is being torn open and rebuilt. And as we look east, toward the East River, something enormous rises on the horizon, a half-finished structure of granite and steel. The Brooklyn Bridge in 1880 is not yet finished. Its 2 granite towers have erupted from the river like Gothic fortresses, and between them, cables of steel stretch across the void. The roadway connecting them does not yet exist. High on the catwalks, workers string cable and drive rivets. Many of them are sick. Decompression sickness, caused by working in pressurized chambers beneath the riverbed, has already claimed lives and permanently broken others. They call it the bends, and among the laborers it is feared more than the height itself. In 3 years this bridge will be complete. And when it opens, it will do something no structure in American history has ever accomplished. It will fuse 2 separate cities, New York and Brooklyn, into a single connected whole and rewrite the balance of power across an entire region. Below the bridge's granite shadow, the Fulton Fish Market sprawls along the waterfront in organized chaos. Mountains of silver-scaled fish piled on wooden carts, merchants screaming prices over one another with a kind of furious dedication that borders on performance. The smell is extraordinary, a thick, wet, almost violent odor of brine and decay and commerce, and it saturates every surface within half a block. This is not a place that polishes itself for visitors. It is a machine, grinding through the business of feeding a city. We leave the river behind and turn west, back toward the interior of the island, and the atmosphere does not simply change, it collapses. We descend into the 4th Ward, and within the span of 2 blocks, every sensory signal reverses. The width of Broadway gives way to narrow streets. The noise here is different too, not sharp industrial percussion, but something more organic and desperate. Voices layered on top of voices, children shrieking, doors slamming. The smell arrives before you can even identify its source. It is thick and layered, rotting cabbage, coal smoke, open sewage. This is the tenement district, and it is, by any measurable standard, the most densely packed stretch of land on the entire planet. Not just in New York, not just in the United States, anywhere. Families of 8 or 10 or 12 crowd into apartments consisting of a single room. No running water, no ventilation worth the name. Windows so small they let in more cold than light. Laundry hangs from every available surface, strung between buildings like a jagged sodden canopy of fabric that flaps and drips over the street below. Children move through the slush barefoot, navigating around heavy wagons and horses with a fluid ease that comes not from bravery, but from having never known anything else. This is their entire world. They have never seen Fifth Avenue. They will likely never see it. The tenements are not a flaw in the city's design. They are the engine of it. Every mansion rising along the northern reaches of Manhattan, every silk dress purchased on Ladies' Mile, every meal served in a Vanderbilt dining room, rests ultimately on the labor that pours out of neighborhoods like this one. The men and women who haul freight, lay bricks, cook food, and clean streets do it for wages that keep them tethered to these narrow, suffocating streets across generations. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. And the people who benefit most from that design live far enough away that they never have to smell it. We pull ourselves out of the 4th Ward and climb back toward the center of the island, and the transformation is so abrupt it borders on the surreal. The streets widen. The pavement here is actually swept. The air itself feels different, cleaner, cooler, carrying traces of something almost luxurious. We have arrived at Union Square, and from here, stretching northward along Broadway and the surrounding blocks, runs what the city calls the Ladies' Mile. This is the commercial heart of Gilded Age New York, the stretch where wealth puts on its most visible and unapologetic display. The storefronts here are grand, in a way that has everything to do with the statement they make, simply by existing. Tiffany and Company occupies one corner with its polished glass and quiet authority. Lord & Taylor rises nearby, a temple to consumption dressed in the architectural language of European palaces. The women moving along these sidewalks wear dresses of layered silk and satin, bustles extending the silhouette of their gowns into something sculptural and almost architectural, their faces partially hidden by parasols tilted at precisely calculated angles. These are not women who have wandered onto this street by accident. Every element of their appearance has been assembled with an intention that would be unrecognizable to anyone a few miles south in the 4th Ward. Overhead, the elevated railroad, the L, cuts through this scene on iron stilts, its wooden cars rattling and groaning as they carry passengers northward at a speed that still surprises those who are not accustomed to it. The shadows it casts flicker across the storefronts in a rapid hypnotic rhythm, and its noise, a sustained mechanical rumble punctuated by the screech of brakes at each stop, is the sound that most residents of this district have come to associate with progress itself. A handsome cab pulls to the curb nearby, and a man in a fur-trimmed coat descends to escort a woman toward the entrance of one of the grand hotels that line this stretch. There is an atmosphere here of absolute certainty, a collective, unspoken conviction among everyone present that this particular arrangement of the world is permanent, that the wealth, the elegance, the scale of what they have built will endure without interruption for as long as civilization itself continues. They are wrong. Within 2 or 3 generations, the great department stores will migrate further uptown, chasing the money as it moves north. The cast-iron buildings that line these blocks, beautiful, elaborate, built to last centuries, will fall into disuse and slow decline. Artists and writers will eventually move in, paying almost nothing for vast open spaces in buildings that once housed the most fashionable retail establishments in the country. The neighborhood will acquire a new name. They will call it Soho. And the women in silk dresses and the men in fur coats will have vanished so completely that the buildings themselves will seem to have been designed for an entirely different purpose, which, in a way, they will have been. But none of that is visible from where we stand now. The present moment carries only its own weight, and in 1880, that weight feels infinite. We begin walking north along 5th Avenue, leaving the commercial energy of Ladies' Mile behind us, and the city begins to thin out in ways that feel almost disorienting after the density of everything we have passed through. The buildings grow sparser. Vacant lots appear between them, raw, unfinished stretches of rock and weeds where nothing has been built yet, but where the surveyor's stakes already mark out plots that will soon become some of the most expensive real estate in the world. The air here carries the sharp mineral scent of fresh mortar and newly turned earth, and it moves more freely, no longer trapped between close-set walls. We are approaching the frontier of the city's northern expansion, and the landscape we find there will tell a story that contradicts almost everything we have witnessed so far. We stop near 50th Street, and the city reveals something it has been hiding for the entire length of our walk. To the east, the twin spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral have just been completed, white limestone catching the gray light and holding it, glowing with an almost aggressive purity against the sky. The cathedral is new enough that the stone still looks as though it was cut yesterday, its Gothic arches and soaring interior representing the single most ambitious architectural statement the Catholic Church has made on American soil. It is beautiful in the way that only buildings constructed with absolute conviction can be, not merely impressive, but declarative, a claim staked on the landscape, visible for blocks in every direction. But turn away from the cathedral and look at what surrounds it, and the declaration takes on a different meaning entirely. This stretch of Manhattan in 1880 is not yet a neighborhood. It is a battlefield between what exists and what is being forced into existence. Directly adjacent to the rising marble facades of the Vanderbilt estates, those immense townhouses that represent the single greatest concentration of private wealth in American history, sit shanty towns, actual structures built from scrap wood, salvaged tin, and whatever materials their inhabitants managed to scavenge from construction sites nearby. The contrast is not subtle. It does not require interpretation or deeper analysis to grasp. It is visible from a single vantage point, occupying the same frame of reference, separated by nothing more than an unpaved stretch of ground. A man worth more than most nation-states lives within earshot of families who are not entirely certain they will eat tomorrow. The Vanderbilts are not anomalies. They are the logical endpoint of everything this city has been building toward for decades. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who controlled the largest railroad network in the country before his death just a few years prior, left behind a fortune so vast that his sons are still in the process of figuring out how to spend it. The mansion they are constructing here on Fifth Avenue will become one of the most extravagant private residences ever built in America. A monument not merely to wealth but to the belief that wealth, accumulated fast enough and spent boldly enough, can literally rewrite the physical landscape of an entire city. And in a sense, it already has. The northward push of Manhattan's development, the slow, relentless colonization of what was once farmland and rocky wilderness, is driven almost entirely by the desire of men like the Vanderbilts to place ever greater distance between themselves and the crowded, reeking streets of lower Manhattan. In the distance, visible above the construction and the vacant lots and the half-finished buildings, the upper reaches of Central Park stretch out in a landscape that looks, from this vantage, almost untouched by human hand, which is, of course, an extraordinary illusion. Every tree, every path, every carefully sculpted hill and artificial lake in that park was placed with surgical precision by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, designers who understood something that few people grasped at the time, that a city growing at this speed, consuming itself with commerce and labor and ambition, would eventually need somewhere to breathe. The park is not yet fully mature. Certain sections remain raw and incomplete, but even in its unfinished state, it functions as something close to a pressure valve, a green contradiction embedded in the heart of a city that has otherwise surrendered every square inch of open ground to development. The air up here is noticeably different, cleaner. It carries the smell of earth and growing things rather than sewage and smoke, and for a brief moment it is almost possible to forget what lies just a few miles to the south. The tenements, the fish markets, the sandwich men and the stock traders and the immigrant families clutching wooden trunks at the edge of a continent. Almost possible, but not quite. Because New York does not allow forgetting. It is built in such a way that every layer of wealth and every layer of suffering are stacked directly on top of one another, separated by elevation and reputation, but never by anything as permanent as distance. New York in 1880 is not a finished thing. It is a mechanism in the middle of its most violent transformation, shedding everything it was in order to become something no one alive in this moment can fully predict. The horses that fill these streets will disappear within 40 years. The mansions will be converted into museums or torn down to make way for towers that dwarf even the boldest dreams of this age. Castle Garden will become an aquarium. The Ladies' Mile will become an artist colony, and St. Patrick's Cathedral will stand exactly where it stands now. Its white spires still cutting the sky, one of the few fixed points in a city that has spent its entire existence refusing to remain still. What this city was in 1880 is not simply history. It is a blueprint. The same appetite that drove men to build marble palaces next to shanty towns, that restless, almost violent hunger for more, is the same appetite that has shaped every version of New York that came after. The tools changed, the scale changed, the speed changed beyond recognition. But the fundamental engine, that electric, uncomfortable, deeply human refusal to accept any limit as final, has not changed at all. It never has. And if the past 2 centuries tell us anything worth remembering, it never will.